You might write off Conor the fighter, but it's way harder to write off Conor the showman. Putting on a smirk after 2 back-to-back defeats, McGregor's shown he's here to stay. The latest to join the Conor comeback bandwagon with his comments is Daniel Cormier, former UFC heavyweight champion. So let's dive into what a return to the cage may mean for the unicorn of UFC, including a possible matchup with friends turned foe Artem Lobov. First off, Conor settles old business before his big comeback. If there's one thing we know for certain about the Fighting Irish, he's going to put on a show. True to form, he's settling old scores before racking up new ones. The latest tick off his checklist was his lingering lawsuit from the unfortunate UFC 223 bus incident. McGregor's spokesperson herself confirmed that the lawsuit against the fighter had been settled. More importantly, this means that Conor can turn his focus back to the game with his infectious presence and incredible showmanship. With the lawsuit settled, the fight will finally go on for the Fighting Irish. But there's still more to come, including a court battle against his former friend, Artem Lobov. Again, you can bet Conor's not going to let this slide, as he's promised to fight it out in court and otherwise. But will he get to take his fight with Lobov to the cage? Let's hear what Conor's senior in the UFC, Dan Cormier, has to say about that. Following up, what Cormier predicts for the former featherweight champ's return. From a heavyweight double champ to a featherweight double champ, Cormier has been candid in his commentary on the next battle inside the octagon for his peer. His guess? Michael Chandler. The 6-time US Olympic fighter knows a thing or two about matchups, having a total of 26 contenders to his name in his MMA career. His credibility is also boosted by his current credential as a UFC commentator. This position, both inside the cage and outside it at the same time, gives him a unique edge when it comes to predicting fights. And he's edging toward Michael Chandler as being the next opponent for the Fighting Irish. Let's learn more about what makes Cormier so sure about McGregor versus Chandler. We all know wins decide the fighter's next fight. Winners fight against other winners. That's the rule of the game. But as you might expect, it also goes the other way around. Losers get to fight other losers. And both Conor and Michael have been submitted to a loss by the same person in their recent fights, Dustin Poirier. If you've heard the saying, "The friend of my enemy is my enemy," then the enemy of my enemy is my opponent for Chandler and McGregor. Michael Chandler, too, was burned by Dustin Poirier, as was the Notorious twice. The fairly recent losses for both the champs make them perfect to be each other's opponents. If either of them can beat the other, it will not only mean some well-needed redemption points, but it might also decide the future of their fighting career, at least in the UFC. Not to mention, their fighting styles are bound to light up fireworks. Conor and Chandler share more than a common enemy. They have similar fighting styles too. Cormier was the first to pounce on this common losing streak, promising a first-rate matchup between the two fighters. For one, both of them are strikers, and their opponents can attest to this with cuts and bruises to show for it. Both fighters also sneer at wrestling and grappling. So these are two of the sharpest swords of the UFC, lethal in their strikes. But just as two swords in the same case are bound to clash together sometime or the other, similarly, these two strikers on the same roster are set up to clash together in their UFC career. So it'll be a battle for the ages, as the loser will lose their title to being the best striker, and the winner will take home the big prize of not only winning the fight, but also being the predominant striker on the UFC roster. At the same time, we're sure each fighter thinks they're the best the UFC has to offer, but the only way to prove that would be in the cage, and you can bet each will do their best in the lead up to the match. What's more, UFC is not just ultimate fighting, it's also ultimate entertainment. There's no one like Conor, never has been, never will be. His record as a fighter is only overshadowed by his record as an ultimate entertainer inside and outside the UFC. The sportsman's got a gorilla tattooed on his chest, a crown on its head, and a heart in its mouth. You can be sure that the person wearing this image, Conor himself, also sees himself as a heart over head kind of person. But we don't have to guess since Conor's heart's always beating for his next fight. This means sparing no one in his battle to claim the crown for himself. Even Daniel Cormier isn't exempt from the former champion's sharp wits and blistering verbal jabs. Yes, he is showing everyone that he's hungry and coming for them, as he recently mocked the commentator's appearance and gave him a harsh dressing down for his failure to keep up his physique. Speak of collateral damage, not to mention, Conor's always sold out the stadium by being his best hype man. Conor's gameplay is mystifying, but his promotion tactic is even better, and that's what pays off. And instead of diminishing him in the eyes of his peers, it only raises his profile. Even Cormier gave a paternal piece of advice in response to the former UFC lightweight champion's digs at his appearance, advising him to focus on his next battle, whether it's part of his gameplay or just a bull rearing for any flags that come in his way. His action and enthusiasm promise a bull run straight to his next fight. We're also sure the fire feeding his frenzy is also going to prove useful when it comes down to his upcoming fight. His vicious streaks only bound to level up several notches if his next fight gets to be against Artem Lobov. There's a history of bad blood there that not only promises to spill over into an exciting knockout of a match, but also big business for the UFC. So let's see just how big of an event a potential McGregor versus Lobov fight promises to be, provided the UFC decides to claim liability for the huge fight. Now for the fight going on behind the proposed fight. UFC can cut down the marketing budget for a McGregor versus Lobov matchup, since it's going to pay for itself several times over. A big reason behind this is, of course, the infamous vandalism by McGregor's camp in the lead up to UFC 223. While the lawsuit might be under the bridge, Lobov and McGregor are only warming up with a court battle over the Proper 12 whiskey brand. Both sides might also resent each other for pushing the other under the bus after the bus incident before UFC 223. In particular, Lobov, whose career with the UFC was permanently derailed after the incident. For a career fighter, it's hard to turn the other cheek anyway, but this slap on his career surely left a far deeper mark. If there's one way to settle scores, the best way would be in the cage, in no-holds-barred revenge action. For the UFC, too, the incident was a stain on their reputation, but if there was ever a way to redeem a loss, surely it's by turning it into a profitable main event. Up next, will it be a fair fight? A fight only looks good when it's between equals. Even in underdog stories, there's more than a slight chance of an upset. So is it fair to pitch the two against each other? On one hand, McGregor's not washed out just yet, as his continued influence in the UFC shows us. Yes, he's got 2 straight losses, but they were against one person only. His recent resurgence shows it's all done and dusted, and he could very well become an event headliner for the UFC. On the other hand, Artem Lobov got ejected from the UFC quite some time ago. Meanwhile, he's gone on to become a freelancer for less prestigious championships, including the Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. He's won 2 of the 3 fights he was billed for. While his last fight for the contract was a TKO, perhaps the road to his redemption could be through Conor McGregor. But fair or not, both fighters mean business at this turning point in their careers. So it's going to be a cracker fight between the two, because both fighters are hungry to put an end to their losing streaks. Finally, will the UFC bet their unicorn and reputation in a matchup with Lobov? The UFC certainly got more than it bargained for the last time Lobov and McGregor got together, and back then, they were in the same camp. Now, imagine both fighters opposite each other, and just how much chaos that might mean. But more chaos means a bigger fight, and bigger fights sell more tickets, especially in the UFC. So yes, it's surely a huge gamble, but one thing we can vouch for is that this match is going to be high stakes, and potentially higher rewards for both the UFC and the returning fighters. That's all for this video. Who are you betting on on as Conor's next opponent? We'd love to know your opinions in the comments below. Do hit the like button if you liked this video, and remember to subscribe to our channel for more updates. We'll see you in the next one.